The next speaker is Mrs. Sonoda, the Fukushima mother who evacuated with her child and husband to Western Japan. And maybe just as well, if I could be very apologetic, I'm so sorry, but I have another meeting at 8 o'clock. So I will catch up with Ian afterwards to find out what I missed from Mrs. Sonoda, but I already can tell that this is such an important meeting, and I just want to thank all of our speakers so much for your courage and your determination to make sure that what happened in Fukushima 8 years ago will not be forgotten, and the rest of the world must learn from that. And I think your message here in the United Kingdom is needed more urgently than ever, so thank you so much for sharing that with us.
I was living in Fukushima with my husband and child. Our village was in beautiful countryside. We picked wild vegetables and nuts in the mountains, grew our own food in our garden, went swimming in a lake and skiing on the local slopes. We lived in a fantastic natural environment and with a strong local community. But now, 52,000 people are registered as official nuclear evacuees. We can't count the many unrecorded unofficial evacuees. 3 reactors melted down. 168.5 times more radioactive cesium has been released than from the Hiroshima atomic bomb. And radiation is still being released into the air and the ocean every day. The Fukushima nuclear disaster is the same record as Chernobyl level 7. The mega earthquake and big aftershocks were frightening enough, but then we saw the explosion of reactor 1 live on TV. It was massive shock. The TV commentators were also stunned. We began preparing in case we needed to move quickly, but couldn't decide what should we do. 2 days later, reactor 3 exploded. We decided to evacuate because we knew reactor 3 used MOX fuel, which contained plutonium. It was a nightmare. Much public transport stopped and many roads were closed by earthquake damage. Daily essentials were lacking in shops, including food and petrol. The government hid information about the radioactive plume, resulting in mothers and children queuing for food and water under the radioactive fallout. They left us to be exposed to radiation. Finally, we were able to get to an airport. It was full of people trying to escape. TEPCO is the owner of the Fukushima nuclear plant. A TEPCO worker was on the same flight as us. He said to me, "I'm going to see my parents for a couple of days." My boss let me go to see my parents before entering inside the Fukushima nuclear plant. Hundreds of thousands of workers have been exposed to radiation every day since the disaster, with no follow-up. The UN Special Rapporteurs warned the Japanese government about the workers' situation last August, but the government doesn't take any responsibility for them. Many countries, including the UK, warned their citizens to leave Fukushima and Japan. The British Embassy in Tokyo distributed medical iodine to British people to help protect their thyroid from radiation exposure and warned them not to enter the north of Japan. But the Japanese government didn't give iodine to Japanese citizens and kept announcing, "Radiation will have no immediate effect on your health." The evacuation zone was made as small as possible. We had to make a decision ourselves because of the government's dishonesty. The international safety dose limit for man-made radiation is 1 millisievert per year, but the government raised the dose limit to 20 millisievert per year for Fukushima citizens, including infants, children, and pregnant women. It is 4 times higher than at Chernobyl. If the 1 millisievert limit was kept, many schools would not be able to open. Professor Yamashita, an official radiation risk advisor, was highly paid to tour Fukushima for the government. He said, "If you are smiling, radiation will not affect you. Radiation will come to people who are worried about radiation. There is no problem playing outside for children." The government used him to manipulate the Fukushima victims, and we were torn apart by his lectures, and conflict was created between victims. The UK can also find scientists and academics to claim that it is safe, even though evidence is lacking for suppressed through lack of finance and strategic sensibilities. Illness, including child cancers, suicide, family conflict, divorce, discrimination, bullying, poverty, and the destruction of local communities are the invisible problems created by the nuclear disaster. But everything is treated as the individual's own responsibility by the government and the TEPCO. The safety of food is a concern for avoiding internal radioactive exposure. There are over 50 independent testing centers around Japan. The levels found are often higher than in official testing. Many radionuclides, including plutonium and strontium, weren't checked officially in food, only cesium. Recently, a study by Kyushu and Manchester universities found that microparticles are at much higher concentrations than expected, even outside the evacuation zone, with a risk of inhalation. Many children and mothers have ongoing health problems. More than 50 countries stopped importing Japanese products, but the EU and this country eased the restrictions 2 years ago. I hope you will consider that contaminated food from Japan are being imported into the UK. The declaration of nuclear emergency situation still continues in Japan, but last year the government lifted most evacuation zones, even though many are still highly contaminated, and will stop all housing support at the end of this month. The government is pressuring students to return to Fukushima. Some evacuees have ended up on the street, and some committed suicide. The evacuee situation is critical now. Since 2011, Fukushima has scanned the thyroid of most children under 18 who were living there at the time of the disaster. Child thyroid cancer is usually very rare, but officially 273 have been found to have a thyroid cancer. In many cases, cancer has spread to other parts of the body, and the cancer developed abnormally quickly. The government finally admitted that the numbers are unusual, but they don't accept that the cause is the nuclear disaster. And BBC journalists blame the Japanese mothers for making their children ill by worrying about them too much, saying that stress will be the only health effect. We have been criticized inside and outside of Japan that we made the wrong decision. Mothers have been in such a difficult situation with big risks of serious illness. After the disaster, particularly women, children, and disabled people have been treated as nuisances and abandoned. Millions of tons of radioactive waste have been kept in bags across eastern Japan, including residential areas and schools. Many bags are breaking, and we breathe in the contaminated dust. My uncle said, if the government says Fukushima is safe, take the contaminated soil from my field to Parliament. Also, the contaminated soil in Fukushima will be used for agriculture and road construction. It was said that nuclear industry created local jobs, and the same is said in this country. However, the disaster ruined their health, work, and community and had huge effects on millions of people. 2 years ago, I went to the United Nations in Geneva to give a speech for the Universal Periodic Review, UPR, press session. I talked about the violation of women and children's rights in the aftermath of Fukushima and appealed to the UN permanent missions. As a result, Germany, Austria, Portugal, and Mexico sent recommendations to the Japanese government, requesting that the government should support the Fukushima victims and follow international safety standards. Although the Japanese government accepted them officially, they are still ignoring it. The economy comes first, not our lives. The Japanese government do not recognize us as internally displaced persons, IDPs. I went to the UN again as an IDP panelist last June. The Human Rights Council keeps pressuring the Japanese government for the last 2 years, but they are avoiding their responsibility. Over 12,000 Fukushima victims have filed 30 cases against the government and TEPCO. 5 courts have judged that they have a responsibility for the victims, but the government have appealed, rejecting judicial decisions. Their aim is to delay and waiting for us to get old and die, as they did with the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic victims. Meanwhile, the top 3 executives of TEPCO are being prosecuted in criminal proceedings, and the judgment will be in September. The victims are not just Japanese. The US effort to support Japan at the time of the disaster was called Operation Tomodachi, which means Operation Friend. Over 400 American sailors who worked on Operation Tomodachi are suing TEPCO for compensation over radiation exposure from the Fukushima triple reactor meltdown. 9 people have died. Others have various diseases, including leukemia. Japan's approach of minimizing evacuation and compensation and insisting that radiation is safe should not become the new model for the world, including the UK. New nuclear power stations are being built in the UK with foreign capital, foreign technology, and foreign operation. After the Fukushima disaster, Japanese company cannot build any more nuclear power stations in Japan. So the government plans to export its new nuclear business. But all plans are ended, including Toshiba in Moorside and Hitachi in Anglesey. Also, UK nuclear safety regulation haven't been decided for after Brexit, which means nuclear stations may operate with weakened regulation. Even if a nuclear disaster doesn't happen, human error or terrorism can be the cause of a catastrophe as bad as those at Chernobyl, Sellafield, 3 Mile Island, and so many accidents that happened in the past. The Japanese government used the slogan, "Fukushima is not a problem," and people are living as normal. For the Tokyo Olympics in 2020, they will supply Fukushima produce to feed the World Olympic athletes without checking for strontium or plutonium, and some sports will be played in Fukushima. Before the disaster, the Japanese government said, nuclear power is cheap, clean and safe, and severe nuclear accident will not happen. And the press did not question anything and was quiet. Politicians too. It is very similar to British situation now. I can't see enough debate about the nuclear issue in the British media. It is very dangerous. Victims are not just human. Abandoned pets in evacuation zones, farm animals, wild animals, insects, fish, trees, all across the land and into the ocean. All of nature was exposed to radiation by selfish human beings. Nature will never be the same for billions of years. We don't want anybody else to become a nuclear victims in the world. You are me before the Fukushima nuclear disaster. And I hope you can feel the many thousand voices from the Fukushima nuclear victims through us. Thank you.